Well, good. So one of the things that people probably don't understand very well here in America, dealing with the Middle East, has to do with something called moral equivalence. If I were going to use an illustration, it's like saying that you have a fireman and you have an arsonist, and between them is a cycle of violence. Now, of course, most people would say that's stupid. That's true, like also with a policeman and a robber. It's not a cycle of violence. You have somebody who's defending the law and somebody who's breaking it, somebody who's trying to cause destruction and someone who's trying to save life. So unfortunately, sometimes politicians will use the term cycle of violence. And that's kind of saying like everybody's at fault and everyone has to give in. Years ago, when America was dealing with communism as a challenge, they didn't say it's all the same. Communism is fine, capitalism is fine. But today, people who don't know a lot about Islam in the Middle East sometimes say, hey, it's all equal. You got Jews on one side, you got Muslims on the other side. They're both right, they're both wrong, who cares? But the Jewish people have to give up. So this issue of moral equivalence is really something to realize. Israel is really on the barricades, on the front lines, in terms of being a target of global jihad. And so, from the Muslim perspective, they see Israel as moving eastward, but really they don't want to have a Jewish state there. That's ultimately the issue. According to their perspective, once territory has been conquered by the armies of Muhammad, the area becomes something called Waqf. Waqf means it's Muslim land in perpetuity. And so for Jews to come in and to defeat 5 to 22 Islamic armies is an affront to Islam. And they see this as something that whole state needs to be shut down, the Jews need to be removed, and if they won't go peacefully, it needs to be done through war. This touches on ancient narratives and legends within the Islamic community. It's found very clearly in their holy books, which are called the Quran, and the other one is called the Hadith, which is a kind of a commentary on the Quran. And so this issue of moral equivalency is so important for the West, because if Israel is not fighting the West's battles, and what goes down in Israel eventually comes to America. I even believe Hillary Clinton years ago, so when she was senator, said that Israel is like the canary in the mine shaft. In other words, in olden days, miners had canaries in a cage, and if poisonous gas came out, the canary would die before humans would. And so the canary was an indicator when things got dangerous. And so Senator Clinton at that time was saying, look to Israel, because what's coming against them is something that's going to come against the rest of the world. So I think that's one thing to help us to understand. I think another thing is that it's nearly impossible to make sense of what's going on in the Middle East apart from the issue of the Scriptures. Now again, if we don't accept the Bible, then we're just looking at it in terms of relative justice, and we're not dealing with, let's say, the promises of God about that land, or the fact that God said He would restore the Jewish nation to that land in Isaiah 11:11. This stuff has happened to no other nation on earth. The Irish Americans are not going back. President Reagan is an Irish American. When he served, he didn't go back to Ireland. President Clinton didn't go back to England. It just doesn't happen. But the Jewish people, according to the prophetic word, are going back to their land. So that's something that caused the great historian Toynbee to say, I don't understand what's going on with the Jewish people. They're a fossil of history. They have no business getting back on the stage of history. But here we are. And so I don't think one can really make sense of what's happening until one gets into the mystical aspect of the Hebrew Scriptures and what these Hebrew prophets said 2,700 years ago, 3,500 years ago, and even Jesus himself talked about him coming back to this earth, and he didn't say he's coming back to Constantinople or to Moscow or to St. Louis or to Geneva or to Washington or London. He said he's coming back to Jerusalem. And he said that the Jewish people will not see the Messiah again until they welcome him back based on Psalm 118 and Matthew 23:37 through 39. So as far as the issue of how to understand the Middle East, I would say two things. One, we can't use moral equivalence to take jihad and compare it to how the Jewish people are trying to survive. What's at stake is not the issue of, in terms of, let's say, how much land goes to each side. Because from the Palestinian side and from the Islamic side, the concept of the Jews being there, existing, having a state, and actually fighting off the forces of the army of Muhammad, that's a travesty. So it's a theological issue. And that's what's going on in the Middle East. It's actually a clash of holy books and a clash of the spiritual forces behind those holy books. Very politically incorrect, very not progressive, but God is the God of eternity. And what he's doing in the Middle East has an eternal signature on it.